And thanks again for joining us. Russian President Vladimir Putin will be making his second trip out of Russia since the invasion of Ukraine in about a week. He will be visiting Tehran, where he and President Ibrahim Raisi and Turkish President Recep Erdogan will be holding talks. According to the Kremlin, the three are guarantors of the Astana process to promote Syrian reconciliation, and that's all they're saying for now. But the Iranian Foreign Ministry says Iran and Russia had been cooperating on novel technologies even before the Ukraine war. The statement from the Foreign Ministry comes after the U.S. suggested Iran was preparing to train Russian forces to use the drones. Meanwhile, Turkey, Russia, Ukraine and the UN will be meeting tomorrow in Istanbul, Turkey, to discuss the safe export of Ukrainian grain. Ukraine is a key agricultural exporter, and its inability to ship vital grain supplies has caused a surge in food prices, aggravating concerns about a global food situation. Plus, finance ministers have approved €1 billion in financial aid to Ukraine, a first installment of a promised €9 billion budget for Kyiv, agreed upon by European leaders in May. Minister of Finance from the Czech Republic, which holds the EU's rotating presidency, Zbigniew Stanjura, says the money will give Ukraine the necessary funds to cover urgent needs and ensure the operation of critical infrastructure. And finally, in our brief roundup, U.S. energy consortium Westinghouse says it will build a Ukrainian nuclear power station amid a looming energy crisis in the country. It says it will finish the construction of 2 blocks at the Kelminsky power plant in central Ukraine, which will run on U.S.-made fuel rods instead of Russian-made fuel. Let's go inside Ukraine now. State emergency services say a fire gutted a 2-story residential building in Mykolaiv was caused by Russian shelling. Authorities released a video showing firefighters hosing down burnings, a paramedic treating an injured woman and burned vehicles. Regional Governor Vasily Kim said at least 12 people were wounded in shelling of the southern city overnight. He said rockets from multiple rocket launchers landed on 2 medical facilities and residential buildings. Well, Russian authorities say many Ukrainians want to become citizens of Russia, just a day after Moscow published a decree simplifying the rules for Ukrainian citizens to acquire Russian passports. During a call with reporters, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also said there was no discussion of relaunching peace talks with Kyiv over 4 months after Russia sent its armed forces into Ukraine. Russia says residents of areas of southern and eastern Ukraine occupied since February are entitled to become Russian citizens, a move the Ukraine and Western countries are saying confirms that Moscow plans to retain control of those regions. Now, in more of the violence in Ukraine, at least 7 people have been killed in an attack by Ukrainian forces in the Russian-held town of Novokavka in Ukraine's southern Kherson region. Russian media says there are still many people under the rubble. The injured have been taken to hospital, but many blocked in their apartments and their houses. And in addition to damaged buildings, as the attack also led to the explosions at the fertilizer warehouse in the region. A site contained various goods, including grain, fertilizers, foodstuff, and saltpeter. President Zelensky has confirmed 31 people did die in the attack on a residential block in Chasiv Yar over the weekend. He was making this known during his evening address. He said Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, had also come under attack by Russian artillery. Kharkiv in the northeast, close to the Russian border, but outside the Donbass, suffered heavy bombardments in the first few months of the war, followed by a period of relative calm that has been shattered by renewed shelling in recent weeks. Moscow denies targeting civilians, but many Ukrainian cities, towns and villages have been left in ruins. Since the February 24 invasion, attacks on a theater, shopping center and railway station have caused many civilian deaths. Germany's Vice-Chancellor and Economy Minister Robert Habeck says no one should freeze, but German households will need to reset their attitude towards energy and its conservation. He was making the remark at a joint news conference with Austria's Environment Minister Leonore Gewessler in Vienna. Habeck said without private households saving energy, there would be massive consequences for industry and the economy. He also says the energy crisis both countries are currently facing offers new opportunities policies, such as expediting the introduction of renewables into the energy infrastructure. And as a landlocked country unable to build LNG terminals, Austria is dependent on gas supply via pipelines from Germany. Joining me now is senior lecturer and acting head of mass communications department at the University of Benin, Dr. Dan Eharifo. Dr. Eharifo, thank you for joining me on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
We're in the 5th month of this war in Ukraine, and there are still no signs of Russia slowing down with the rocket and missile attacks. In fact, Russia has taken over towns and cities, as we have been reporting. Has foreign intervention succeeded in making things worse in Ukraine, do you think?
It is very obvious that the president of Russia is making serious inroad to Ukraine. And the reason is very simple. The caliber of weapons they have, the strength of the army, the resources at their disposal are contributing factors to this inroad into Ukraine. I thought that when this war started, the promises made from the European Union to Ukraine, they would have supplied the necessary weapons and the human resources necessary to counter the Russia offensive. But as you know, Russia has the adequate technology and weaponry to tackle this war. Unlike the Ukrainians, who are a little late back in terms of the state of technological development. So what you see at play in this war is the capacity of Russia to adequately take on Ukraine without a level of resistance from Ukraine. So as you did ask, the reality is that Russia is gaining ground by the day. I think the dream and vision of the Russian president is to totally annihilate Ukraine. And that is exactly what they are doing.
Yeah, but the question was about, foreign intervention. I'm talking about NATO, the US, and these other countries who have pledged billions in military aid to Ukraine and have supplied weapons, have supplied rockets, and so on. Do you think they're making things worse for Ukrainians, making it more difficult to end this war?
Honestly speaking, I have thought that the Ukrainians will find a way to attack Russian territories. That is not what they are doing. What they are rather doing is to see how they can stop the Russian army from invading Ukraine. In a war situation, the best way you can defend yourself is to attack your enemy. And that is not what the Ukrainians are doing. Even though there are supplies from NATO, the US, and other allies, the reality is that we are not seeing the effort of the Ukrainians in terms of violence and serious attack on Russia territory. Until they start attacking the Russia territory, the supplies and collaborations will not make any headway. As it is still the Ukrainians that are suffering the impact of the war, not the Russians. Although there are casualties on both sides, the reality is that Russians have more of the advantage. You may say they have lost generals, some of their best tanks, their warships and all the rest. But when you compare it to the number of lives lost in Ukraine, the properties destroyed, industries affected, the list is unquantifiable. So despite the support from NATO and all the other allied bodies, the effect on Russia is still very low.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on what you're saying, about the efforts by these international organizations, and why the Ukrainians are not attacking Russia directly. You do remember that at the start of this war, the Russian President Vladimir Putin did threaten anyone who interfered in the war. That probably is the reason why NATO and all these other countries are not putting boots on the ground. But if they do attack Russia, you do understand that World War III would have been started, right?
Look at it logically. Will you wait for an enemy to invade your house and take over your family, destroy your property before you react? Yes, we may say we are trying to avoid war. The reality of a third war is with us. The impact in terms of the economy, You hear complaints about the level of wheat supply around the world. Here in Benin, or virtually every week, prices of bread are increasing because they are complaining that they don't have wheat or grains to produce bread. So if you are feeling that impact in our part of the world where we are not directly affected by the war, you imagine what the Ukrainians are going through. If the Ukrainians must make a headway and force Putin into the negotiating table to stop the war, they must start attacking their territory. If they don't attack the Russia territory, the defense they are putting up is not strong enough to withstand what the Russians are doing. The strategy is to attack territories of Russia where the president will feel the impact, and if it is sustained, there may be the need for them to go back to the discussion table to resolve this issue. If they don't do that, I'm afraid Russia will take over the whole territory of Ukraine.
Yeah, and it does appear that that has been the objective so far for the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's taken over cities in Kharkiv, he's attacking the Donetsk region, and those attacks have been intensified over the past few weeks. So what benefits would it be to him gaining these territories, and then what would be Europe's loss in the end?
If you follow the trends of this war, what Russia wants to do is to harness those territories that are very close to Russia to have a more landmass, the seaport, where they can export goods and services without hindrance. Considering the power of Ukraine in terms of the capacity to produce agricultural products, if Russia succeeds in harnessing this territory, that will give it more land to farm and engage in other economic activities. So if you ask, the victory will be for Russia that their long dream of acquiring more territories so that they can return to the pre-USSR, return to the USSR era. That may just be a starting point for it. What I think about the whole of this war is that when Russia succeeds in winning Ukraine and harness the necessary territories, is going to take on a smaller country that is close. Gradually, it will begin to harness former territories that belong to USSR. I think this is the strategy that Putin wants to put out.
Well, interesting perspective. Now, the EU has set aside €7 billion for rebuilding of infrastructure in Ukraine. They released $1 billion today. President Zelensky is still asking for weapons, HIMARS to be exact, those high rockets that can go as far as Ukraine and the US and all these other countries said they won't give them. But his evening addresses are also continuing. He's calling on countries to do more, impose more sanctions, make Russia feel the pinch. More people are either dying still in Ukraine or they're getting hurt. What more do you think NATO and the EU can do in Ukraine?
Yes, the sanctions imposed on Russia, one would have thought that it would have created an economic crisis that will result to a form of revolution in Russia. But that has not played out. What the EU and NATO needs to do is to quickly re-strategize and think of other measures that are effectively drive this message on the Russia territory. If they don't do that, the reality is that Russia will continue to make inroads into Ukraine and the effect will be more. As a reaction to this, you realize that Russia on its part has adopted measures that can help it sustain its economy, a sort of buffer in the midst of all of this. What I think NATO and its allies should do is to re-strategize and think of more direct ways of confronting Russia. I know people are afraid of a fear of a possible war. If the analysis are right and they get their intents right, it will help in driving a strong message. It can send spies to Russia. It can create crisis in Russia by instigating people that are using propaganda or whatever strategy they can use. If they adopt some of these measures, you may find a quick response in terms of the Russian government thinking of alternatives of how to resolve this crisis. Providing money for Ukraine, supplying them more weapons, like I said earlier, may not be the immediate solution to resolving this crisis. until the Ukrainians start attacking Russia territories. When the government is fighting on both sides, the soldiers fighting on the Ukrainian soil and trying to defend their own territories, that may be the basis for a quick resolution. Because as it is now, it's like Russians are the one fighting and the Ukrainians are waiting in defense. That is not a good way to fight this war. NATO must find a way to empower Ukraine to fight in a more decisive way, not by giving them weapons that can travel miles into the Russian territory to make destructions as they are doing in Ukraine. If they're able to do that, we'll have a situation where both parties will be forced into the discussion table.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, how the rest of the world can recover from what's going on in Ukraine. You mentioned the price of bread that's going higher because the price of wheat has gone higher. And wheat, of course, Ukraine is a huge exporter of wheat, and the rest of Africa also depends on that. Now, how do you think the world will recover from the war in Ukraine, assuming that, the war eventually ends down the line, probably in the next few weeks or the next few months, and oil prices are already high. Russia already made its deal with other European countries who are now paying for gas and paying for oil in ruble. Today, we understand the euro and the pound are at the same exchange at the same rates, the euro falling for the first time in 20 years. Do you think the rest of the world will be the same after this war?
Just like every war, after this war, the world will not be the same. It will take time before we'll have economic recoveries in different parts of the world. The impact is already being felt in Africa. And like the IMF predicted, we will likely have a recession in the coming year. So countries that are forward-looking ought to start thinking of ways of investing in areas that can cushion the effect of this war. In this sense, you ask, what are we getting from Russia? What are we getting from Ukraine? So that when this war ends, how do we survive while waiting for the period of production to pick up? So countries that are forward-looking must start investing in these areas. I don't know why our government is not thinking in this direction. Areas we have comparative advantage, we ought to start investing in those areas so that when the war ends, and it comes to a point where we need to survive. What we are investing in those areas will provide a sort of a buffer for our economy. It will provide a basis for us to start exporting those resources that provide avenue for Russia and Ukraine to take economic advantage. If we are taking in this line, we help in solving the direct impact of the war on our economy and other countries of the world. Every country should start thinking about their own area of comparative advantage and invest in those areas. If they do that, the impact of the war will not be felt for too long.
Dr. Dane Hireford, thank you so much for speaking with us on The World Today.
Thank you very much.
Let's check in on Sri Lanka, where protesters remain within the presidential palace, awaiting the president and prime minister's resignation. Earlier today, many were seen sitting on sofas and in the lawn, while others toured the colonial-era buildings. Security was seen standing by, but not attempting to stop any of the protesters from going in. One onlooker said she had come for a third round to get a good look at the vast property, saying the first impression is that one person lived there in luxury, while many are suffering. Leaders of the protest movement say crowds will occupy the residences of both the president and the prime minister until they finally quit office. And now we're hearing that the son of the assassinated former president and prime minister and presidential hopeful Sajith Premadasa may be nominated by his party as president. Back on the streets, residents have been struggling with food, fuel and medicine shortages as the country sinks deeply into an economic and political crisis. Serpentine queues for fuel in the capital city, Colombo, run through lanes and by lanes, where locals have waited for days outside petrol sheds, which are now being managed by the armed forces. People are running out of patience as well as they struggle to lead their daily life. Shortages of essentials have led to closure of schools, businesses and offices in the country, and many parents are having sleepless nights because of their children's uncertain future. Experts say that at this juncture, the other apprehension for the island nation is to devise an economic recovery plan urgently. In the UK now, a Prime Minister replacing Boris Johnson is expected to be announced on September 5th, so says Chairman of the Conservative Party's Backbench 1922 Committee. Graham Brady said the 1922 committee, which runs the Tory leadership contest, has decided that the candidates will have to get the backing of 20 members of parliament when nominations open and close today. A threshold is markedly higher than the required backing of 8 MPs seen in the party's usual roles. The first round of voting among Tory MPs will be held tomorrow, Wednesday, saying that the contenders will need to receive 30 votes to enter the second ballot scheduled for Thursday. The number of contenders will be whittled down to 2 before MPs break up for the summer recess on July 21st. The final 2 contenders will then go through a postal ballot of all the Conservative members, numbering around 200,000 over the summer, and the winner will become the new Tory leader and the UK's next Prime Minister. Well, one of those in the race to becoming Prime Minister and head of the Conservative Party is former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak, who set out his leadership campaign pitch today, offering himself up as an honest Prime Minister who would balance the books, reduce the role of the state, and who would grow the economy. Sunak says he's one candidate to replace Mr. Johnson to have a plan for the economy, saying he will tackle inflation before turning to tax cuts. Earlier today, he was met by cheers from a crowd of Conservative lawmakers who were backing him and received endorsements from Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab and Transport Minister Grant Shapps, who said he had abandoned his own bid for the leadership.
We need a leader who can win. And the reality is the polling shows only Rishi can beat Labour. Only Rishi can win with the support of Leave voters and Remain voters. Only Rishi can win in the north and in the south, in the blue wall and the red wall. He's got the economic leadership. He's got the values to bring us all together. And he's the only one that can win.
My message to the party and the country is simple. I have a plan to steer our economy through these headwinds. We need a return to traditional Conservative economic values, and that means honesty and responsibility, not fairy tales.
From staying in the UK, though, but in other stories, multiple Olympic and world champion Mo Farah has revealed he was brought to Britain from Djibouti at the age of 9 and was forced to do housework and childcare in exchange for food. He was revealing this in an interview with the BBC. Farah, who was born in Somalia, said his name had been changed to Mohammed Farahi from Hussein Abdi Khan, Kahin, beg your pardon, the fake travel documents used to fly him to Britain by a woman he had never met before. A 39-year-old said that once he arrived in the UK, the woman took him to her home in Hounslow, West London, and tore apart a paper with the contact details of his relatives. Her family did not allow him to go to school until the age of 12. His physical education teacher, Alan Watkinson, contacted social services and helped him find a foster family in the Somali community after Farah told him what he was going through. I want to bring in immigration lawyer Dayo Fadino to discuss this. Dayo, thank you for joining me on the program today. What would you call, well, he's now a Sir Mo Farah's situation? Is it a case of human trafficking?
Good afternoon, Amarashi, and good afternoon to your viewers. Indeed, when Farah arrived in the UK about 30 years ago, and accompanied by an adult he never met in his life. Indeed, that situation was human trafficking, the trafficking of a child, a 9-year-old child. There's always been this case of trafficking from so many parts of the world into the UK. Children, so many minors being brought into the UK. And it was a case some 30 years ago, and it's still the case today. So indeed, the situation was human trafficking.
Well, if he's confessing now, he's making this revelation many years after being brought into the country. If this had happened in light of recent immigration laws in the UK, what do you think would have happened to him?
The current immigration rules and regulations in the UK have been, tightened. In fact, there are more. The rules and regulations, the immigration rules, regulations, and even the asylum rules and regulations are quite draconian these days. There are so many situations where now, as you are quite aware, so many people who claim asylum in the UK today, there's now this plan to now deport them to Rwanda. But as far as children are concerned, if any child is brought into the UK, just like Farah was brought into the UK about 30 years ago, he would still be protected by the state. The rules and regulations are very, very quite clear on this. The guidelines are also very clear that if there's the case that a child has been trafficked into the UK, and it could be proven that that child is a minor, that child has the right they will at least protect that child, either under humanitarian protection, or if it's the case that the child claimed asylum, a child cannot claim asylum, so the child would have to be protected by the state. So, and it's a well-established rule and law that a minor, a child, can never ever actually be complicit in obtaining British citizenship by deception. A minor would always be a minor, particularly if this minor does not even know what's going on. And the state would no doubt have, they are bound under the rule and the law to protect that type of child.
Is it possible to probably trace the woman or find the woman who brought him into the UK, and could she also face the law?
I think the press have actually made attempts to get in touch with this lady. Going by what I read yesterday evening, but she's not just responding to the approaches of pressmen and women. Maybe she doesn't want to discuss or talk about this.
But whose responsibility will it be? Whose responsibility will it be to bring her to justice?
It will be the responsibility of the state. If they could still prosecute her for what she did some 30 years ago. The fact that it's now only just come to light, nobody knew about this until Farah actually started talking about it. So the states could still pick her up and, pick her up for what she did some 30 years ago and prosecute her. If it's the case that it could be proven that this was the woman who actually brought Farah into the UK.
Do you probably wonder why he's talking about this now? I mean, it's been 30 years since it happened.
Yes, 30 years since it happened. My gut feeling, my guess is that I think this very particular matter has been bothering this gentleman for so many years. And the fact that he could actually triumph over this adversity and become a world champion and done so well in his life, that silver lining of him actually now doing so well and being progressive in life, I think maybe he thought that, look, this has been on my mind for so many years. He affected me when I was a kid. And I also suspect that he's now trying to showcase the plight of children who have been trafficked or who have been brought into modern slavery in the UK. And if he felt before he went on air yesterday that with the kind of status he has and popularity he has, he should showcase the plight of so many kids being brought into the UK as minors, and also maybe somewhat make the case in a very, very subtle way that as much as he went through so much adversity when he came into the UK about 30 years ago, he's been able to at least make a good life for himself, and maybe giving the minors and the children who have also been through that same situation hope and to make them understand the fact that if I could actually do this, you could do it too.
Yeah. And now he's being praised for revealing, what happened to him years ago. But could he possibly have broken the law?
Well, when he came in 30 years ago, he was a 9-year-old boy, brought into this country by a woman he hinted that he never knew. And as I stated earlier, a minor, a child, cannot be seen or cannot be prosecuted in any form or in any way for obtaining or be complicit in any way for obtaining British citizenship by deception. It was not his act. It was the act of someone who actually brought him in. If it wasn't for this person who brought this young kid in, there's no way he would have been able to come to the UK. And what would he know? What could he know when he was 9 years old? So indeed, no. At that point, he never actually broke the law. Eventually, I think his teacher was able to obtain his British citizenship for him, I think at the age of 17. Again, at that point, he had to reveal his situation to his sports teacher. Before that sports teacher then took on the matter and approached the Home Office and applied for his indefinite leave to remain and citizenship. At that point, he was also still 17, a minor. So indeed, no, I don't think he broke the law. And the fact that he's now, showcasing what happened to him so many years ago, it's something that we should commend him on, really. And the fact that he could now, openly speak about this and maybe just get this maybe problem or stressful situation off his chest, really, which I think he did yesterday. So I would commend him and not accuse him of being a criminal or breaking the law.
Oh, we're not accusing him. I'm just really interested in his story. Thank you again, Dayo.
I take your point. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Now, the funeral has been held for former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated last week. Mr. Abe was shot dead on Friday as he was addressing a campaign event in the southern city of Nara. A 67-year-old was Japan's longest-serving post-war prime minister and one of its most influential politicians.
The people of Japan say a final goodbye to the man they have loved over the years. Crowds of people lined the streets with heavy police presence as the funeral hearse carrying Shinzo Abe departed from a central Tokyo temple in the early afternoon. People shouted, clapped and waved as it passed, with some holding flowers. The funeral motorcade passed through the capital's political heart of Nagatacho, and landmarks such as the Prime Minister's office and the Parliament building Mr. Abe first entered as a young lawmaker in 1993 after the death of his politician father, and the office from which he led the nation in 2 stints as Prime Minister, the longer from 2012 to 2020. Abe's influence spread beyond Japan, and leaders around the world have been paying tribute to his remarkable leadership. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol paid his last respects in Seoul. He was greeted by Japanese ambassador to South Korea, Koichi Iboshi, at a memorial altar set up for Abe at the Japanese embassy. Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, his Singaporean and Cambodian counterparts, Lee Hsien Loong and Hun Sen, each visited the Japanese ambassador's residence in their respective country to sign condolence books. Prayut had earlier posted that Abe's passing was like losing a great friend and praised his lifelong dedication to public service. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, however, said its embassy in Japan had lodged stern representations with the government there about Taiwan Vice President William Lai attending Mr. Abe's funeral. In the meantime, the mother of the man arrested for Mr. Abe's killing has been said to be a member of the Unification Church. 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami was identified by police as the suspect who approached Abe and opened fire during the campaign speech on Friday, July 8th. The attack was captured on video and shocked a nation where gun violence is rare. Yamagami believed Abe had promoted a religious group to which his mother made a huge donation. President of the Japan branch of Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, known as the Unification Church, confirmed Yamagami's mother was a member of the church, but declined to comment on her donations, citing the ongoing police investigation.
Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer has met with Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, and the two leaders signed a strategic partnership agreement between the countries. According to a statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, the agreement ranges from issues of security and cyber to health and tourism. Mr. Nehammer later toured Israel's Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, in Jerusalem.
We have the chance that we build our relations stronger than they are before. The signing of the strategic partnership between our two countries proves that. And yes, now we have to bring it to life.
This is a comprehensive and upscaling agreement between our countries, and signing this agreement is an important moment in the history, in the great history we have between our peoples. And now I think what you and I should do is instruct our teams to work to make this, bring it to life. To bring it to life and make this into a tangible and substantial, not only an agreement, but a relationship.
Let's check in on the weather now, beginning in Shanghai, China. The city baking in scorching temperatures as a relentless heat wave drives residents to seek cool in the public water fountains and raid shelters underground. Authorities have declared an orange alert, the second highest on its three-tier heat wave warning system, forecasting temperatures in excess of 37 degrees Celsius. One resident says this year the heat arrived a little earlier than before. I believe we're showing India. We'll talk about that in a minute. China is facing a summer of contrasts this year, with heat waves and heavy rainfall taking turns to wreak havoc across the country. Authorities citing climate change have warned of potential weather disasters from mid-July, traditionally the hottest and wettest time of the year. And now to India, pictures which we were just showing you. Residents in the western Gujarat states facing shortages of essentials, including food and power, as floods hit the region following intense heavy rain. Video of the area showed floodwater flowing past submerged vehicles and a building which forced over 3,000 people to evacuate. One victim says roads get flooded every year due to the rains and water enters the houses. There is no electricity and they have a problem in arranging food. District Collector Navsari Amit Prakash Yadav said the Perna River was overflowing above the danger level, and India's Meteorological Department says a heavy rainfall is expected to continue for some more time. The largest city of Gujarat, Ahmedabad, experienced waterlogging in some areas, forcing garbage to overflow into the streets, increasing the risk of waterborne diseases. In India's financial capital, Mumbai, the heavy rains caused waterlogging and traffic disruptions. The Meteorological Department says India is likely to receive monsoon rainfall between 94% and 106% of the long-term average in July, a most crucial month for planting rice and a host of other summer crops such as corn, cotton, soybean and sugarcane. In neighboring Pakistan, authorities are struggling to clear flood waters a day after torrential rains caused widespread flooding and damage in Pakistan's financial capital, Karachi, even inundating the business district. The heavy rains stopped midday Monday in Karachi, but the Meteorological Office forecasts more rains in the coming days. Moderate to heavy showers over the past week has inundated parts of the city, with water entering homes and shops in low-lying areas. One death had been confirmed in the latest spell of monsoon rains, adding to the 29 reported since they began last month. City Administrator Martaza Wahab said in a tweet that the administration is trying its best to address the situation, and pumping stations installed at various spots were working at full capacity. Away from the weather, in South Africa, police say they have arrested 2 suspects in connection with the tavern shootings over the weekend that left a total of 19 people dead. 15 people were shot dead in a bar in Soweto and 4 others in another bar in KwaZulu-Natal, but police do not think the incidents are related. The announcement of the arrests come as the Minister for Police, Becky Cele, received a report on the mass shootings. In a statement, the police assure that the arrests of the 2 linked to the shooting was a first step of bringing to book all those who orchestrated one of the country's bloodiest weekends. And police says some of its response team have been deployed to Soweto to assist with policing in response to the needs of the community. Comes amid pressure for the authorities to find those responsible for the killings, with the police being blamed for not doing enough to protect citizens. Authorities in Saudi Arabia are preparing to host 6 million pilgrims by 2030 and is adopting safety measures to ensure effective crowd management. The government has spent billions of dollars for the provision of massive infrastructure and services to accommodate the growing number of pilgrims and to guarantee their safety and security. Our correspondent, Abubakar Salihu, who is in Saudi Arabia, filed this in earlier.
Sitting on the topmost floor of the World Clock Tower in Mecca is a specialized museum that uses astronomy to define the concept of time in the universe. The museum clearly defines the idea of solar system within the Milky Way galaxy of stars, where 9 planets revolve around the sun to give rise to day and night, and the alternation of seasons. Hence, Muslims are asked to observe prayers at specified hours of the day. The curator explains the inspiration behind the World Clock Tower.
The Mecca clock inside consists of 2 main components. The King Abdullah Center for Christian Observation and Astronomy, and then the museum, the Astronomy Museum. There is 2 main topics, the astronomy and the timekeeping. Those are the main subjects. It shows that the universe is huge and large, and then even if it's huge and large and complicated, it turns and function with an accurate, with a lot of precision.
In another development, the 11 robots introduced into the Grand Mosque now ensure cleanliness, especially sterilization of the air around the Kaaba against airborne diseases like COVID-19. Also, some of the robots are programmed to give guidance and direction to pilgrims.
There is 27 interpreter all around the Grand Mosque for the translation. They have 14 languages to guide all the Hajj and Umrah who is coming for Umrah. And there is 10 areas.
According to the Saudi authorities, plans are underway to employ more artificial intelligence into the conduct of the Muslim annual pilgrimage, since the idea behind the adoption of science and technology into the Hajj exercise is to spur Muslims towards proper utilization of time and ease to worship God in the holy mosque. It is hoped that the pilgrims will take advantage of the innovations. From the Grand Mosque in Mecca, Abubakar Salihu, Channel Television.
And as we end the program, U.S. Presidents Joe Biden and NASA's chief Bill Nelson have released a debut photo from NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, an image of a galaxy cluster revealing the most detailed glimpse of the early universe ever seen. The White House sneak peek of Webb's first high-resolution full-color image came on the eve of a larger unveiling of photos and spectrographic data that NASA plans to showcase today at the Goddard Space Flight Center in suburban Maryland, which they're doing right now. The image showcased by Biden and NASA Chief Bill Nelson show the 4.6 billion-year-old galaxy cluster named SMACS 0723, which combined mass acts as a gravitational lens, distorting space to greatly magnify the light coming from more distant galaxies behind it. Nelson said at least one of the faint, older specks of light appearing in the background of the photo, a composite of images of different wavelengths of light, dates back more than 13 billion years. And that makes it just 800 million years younger than the Big Bang, the theoretical flashpoint that set the expansion of the known universe in motion some 13.8 billion years ago. Nelson also says thousands of galaxies were captured in a tiny patch of the sky, roughly the size of a grain of sand, held at arm's length by someone standing on Earth.
You're seeing galaxies that are shining around other galaxies whose light has been bent, and you're seeing just a small little portion of the universe. And that light that you are seeing on one of those little specks has been traveling for over 13 billion years. And by the way, we're going back further, because this is just the first image. They're going back about 13.5 billion years. And since we know the universe is 13.8 billion years old, we're going back almost to the beginning. That is the discovery that we are making.
These images are going to remind the world that America can do big things. And to remind the American people, especially our children, that there's nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing beyond our capacity.
Wow, isn't space fascinating? Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubali.